Welcome, Dr. Lisa Cravens-Brown. We're going to talk a little bit about you and your interest, your deep interest in science and also gender and sexuality. So, Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
So, gosh, tell us how what's your journey here? You got your PhD in psychology. And I know you did some work, very deep work on personality styles and problems of with conduct. But how did you get from there to where you are now? Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's not a journey I think I could have predicted at the beginning. I did theater actually after high school. I was a professional actor for a hot minute there, and so I came to Ohio State as an undergrad, as a non-traditional student. I was a little older than most people are when they start college, and I took intro psych my second term. We were on quarters then, my second term here. And I fell madly in love with psychology as a discipline. 2 weeks into the class, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. I love this topic area. And I also knew I had a really strong interest in the clinical part, the stuff that helps people understand kind of behaviors that are holding them back and that are obstacles, and understanding mental illness and how to help people with mental illness. And then I developed an interest in children with mental illness, and in particular, kids who were really struggling with doing lots of bad behaviors we'd love them to stop doing. And I ended up forming a really great mentoring relationship with Dr. Michael Vasey, who was at that time doing research in child anxiety. And he ended up accepting me into his lab for grad school. So I did my undergrad here, and then also stayed for the child clinical program, earned my PhD here, and then went and did an internship in North Carolina at the University of Chapel Hill. And then I did practice for a number of years. I worked with youth males struggling with inappropriate sexual behaviors. And so I worked in a sex offender program for a number of years, trying to help those kids find better and healthier ways of being in the world. And an opportunity came up to teach here at OSU and also at Ohio Wesleyan part-time. And I took it because I love teaching. I've always thought teaching was one of the greatest activities in the world. And that kind of led me down the road to really exploring some of the other topic areas that I had always really been interested in, which was understanding gender and sexuality and all of the delightful flavors of those things.
So tell us a little bit about these sort of new directions of your work. I've, of course, had the great honor and pleasure of being in your classroom space for some of this. But yeah, do you mind sharing a little bit about this?
Sure. Yeah. So the work that I did when I was doing clinical work was with kids struggling with inappropriate sexual behaviors, which is, of course, not at all about sexuality. It's a lot about power and control. But in the course of that treatment, you work with them a lot on what is healthy sexuality and what are their ideas about sexuality and their own sense of themselves as individuals, their own sense of occupying the gender space, and their own sense of occupying the orientation space, thinking a little bit about, kind of lots of training in not very healthy ways to express sexuality versus finding healthier ways to do that. And that had always been interesting to me before I started that work. And then when I came back to start teaching, one of the classes that was open was the human sexuality class. And I like to tell my students that they thought, some people thought to themselves, oh, Lisa's worked with sex offenders. She knows all about sex. Let's give her that class. And I didn't want to tell them that I actually didn't know that much about human sexuality at that time, but that I really, really wanted that class. So I spent a great deal of time really steeping myself in the psychological literature about human sexuality and its many, many variations. And started teaching the psychology department's human sexuality class. I sat on the oversight committee for the sexuality studies, the interdisciplinary major and minor, and really kind of focused my energy in that direction once I came back about, what was it? don't know, 16 years ago, I think, to do that. And from that, then what used to be called the Psychology of Women class came open. And I repurposed it when we moved to semesters. And instead of calling it Psychology of Women, I thought, well, that's silly. Why would we only be interested in half the population? So I repurposed it to a Psychology of Gender class to really look at all of the dimensions that we could in gender and gender expression. And then the science part is that I am a scientist, and one of the things that I think Ohio State does really, really well is train psychological scientists to think of very scientifically, not to use the word science 400 times, but to think very scientifically about things. And applying that to gender and sexuality is, I think, is very powerful, because when you're out in the popular media space, there's lots of opinions about orientation, gender, human sexuality. And I really like being able to go back to the literature and say, okay, well, your opinion is fantastic, but what are some of the scientific underpinnings? And what do we know? And how can I bust some harmful myths in myself and everybody else? I really, really like that. I like combining things that people come in thinking they know everything there is to know already about sexuality, everything there is to know about gender. And I really try to open up their hearts and open up their minds using data.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true, especially with research today. It's so liberating, right? And there's so many different ways that the research has taken us and kind of shown us the complexities and the spectrums instead of this idea of one way or the other way. I
I
love
totally
that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think that students really respond very positively to that. I mean, I don't really approach my classes as you came in here with an idea and you're wrong. I come in with, we all bring our own personal stuff to the table. Let's figure out what the data say about that. And then maybe you'll change your mind, and maybe you won't. It's not my job to change your mind. It's my job to help you look at the data.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of which, I know you're an award-winning teacher. You've done this incredible TEDx talk, among many other things. Tell us, can you share a little bit with us about your findings about, say, gender norms or norms in general?
Yeah, so the TEDx OSU talk that I gave was really intended in 9 minutes or less to kind of walk us through a little bit of the literature that we know about, exactly as you were just saying, this idea of it's not one thing or the other, and that it can be pretty dangerous to really apply those rigid boxes, those rigid categories to people. So what I tried to do in that talk, but then also what I do in all of my classes, is ask ourselves, okay, who cares if I'm wrong that there's male and female and nothing else? Like maybe that's the way you like it and you feel good having those categories. And I really try to ask ourselves, is there something that would be bad about that for anybody? Right? Whether it's bad for you or bad for society or bad for individuals. And the literature is very clear that really having those rigid ideas about there are female people and they're like this, and there are male people and they're like this, and not being able to sort of flex those ideas, that is really harmful to many members of our community. And obviously we all know that when we interpret our own personalities, I might say, I gender identify as a woman. I feel like a woman. That fits me very, very nicely. But if I were to look at the list of things that women do, right, there would be only a few things on that list that really fit me well. And if I look at the things that men do, there might be some things on that list that also fit me well. And so I think when I work with students, I really try to help them understand that for many people, that is an interesting personal journey. For me, it's an interesting personal journey to look at the list of things that women might do and look at the list of things men might do and say, huh, they aren't the same. For someone who is really working on establishing their own identity and understanding their own identity, by me saying to them, you are this thing, and therefore that can impede their ability to develop that identity at all. And it certainly can exacerbate feelings of stress, mental distress, mental illness, if there is any present. And we know that people, for example, people who are who identify as transgender or gender fluid have higher rates of suicidal ideation than people without. And there's no evidence to suggest that that's something about the state of being transgender. All of the evidence suggests that that's because the community in which we live is pretty rigid about, no, your biology says this, therefore. And so there's plenty of evidence to suggest that if we kind of loosen that a little bit and just allow people to be who they are rather than applying these rigid categories, that they will thrive and do better. I will say that none of that is unusual from my other minority studies, right? So when you look at minority stress, you see very similar things, that forcing people into boxes and making decisions for them and about them is not that great.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes. Gosh, I mean, you've already shared with us a little bit of your kind of extraordinary way of conveying and engaging, but is there a kind of, Lisa Cravens-Brown trademark classroom kind of technique or, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I chose the picture for this slide kind of on purpose because I am a performer. I'm still a performer. I'm actively engaged in the theatrical community. And I think of my classroom as an opportunity for me to use some of those skills to kind of pull people toward me and to create. I strongly believe and want to have a community with my students, with my classrooms. And my experience as a performer helps me. I tend to be very extroverted in the classroom. I'm very energetic. I have many little rituals starting with good morning, and then they all yell good morning. And so there are things like that I do to try to really create a strong feeling of connection and safety within the classroom. I am very quick to tell them when I think I've been wrong. If we're discussing something about which I was wrong before, and I'll give you an example from my gender class. When I first started teaching the gender class, and I wanted to cover the myth of maternal instinct, and I did not, it didn't go well the first semester, and I didn't really understand why. And so I did quite a lot of exploration of kind of what had gone awry in the classroom. And so now what I do differently is I tell them from the outset, look, when I first started thinking about this, I wanted very badly to believe that I was a better parent by virtue of my chromosomal makeup. I wanted to believe that so badly because, right, that meant, oh, I got something from being this biological woman, and isn't that great? And it turns out the data don't support that at all, right? It turns out I was 100% wrong about that. And that was a struggle for me, right? Like I had to work through that. I had to read things that, kind of said to me, you're not a better parent because you have XX chromosomes. In the end, I feel much more powerful because that means I'm a good parent because of behaviors I chose, right? Because I work really hard at being a great parent. But it went against this mythology that our community taught me and that our society supports and that I wanted to believe when I came in. And I invite them to have that same journey about other things. So I'm pretty open when I have thought wrong things. And if they bring something to me that represents a new way of thinking about things, I tell them, thank you. I want that. That is what a community of scholars does. So like specific issues of gender and sexuality to me are a little less important than this idea of creating a safe community of scholars. in there.
Yeah, safe community of learning, of trust, of also kind of acknowledging our own um, limitations, but also limitations with always a move to learn how we can be better, right? And understand better ourselves and the world. Yeah, absolutely. So what are you working on? What's next?
Well, I am helping all of our instructors get online for summer. So that's like my immediate thing is let's make it through May. We've got summer classes actually start some of them next week. So we really didn't have any downtime. It's May, let's see here, it's May 4th today. We have May 13th classes. I also am revamping my gender class for fall. So I'm looking forward to actually a HumeCog because that'll help me kind of maybe premiere a little bit of material and the way that I'm thinking about it. I really want to start incorporating maybe a little bit of choose your own adventure in that class and some student presentations that really kind of focus down in some ways that I haven't been able to do in the past. So hopefully my summer is going to be filled with redesigning that class, making it even better than it has been.
Gosh, Lisa, we are so lucky to have you with the Humanities and Cognitive Sciences High School Summer Institute and at OSU, of course. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, I feel so grateful to be a part of your community, and thank you again for having this opportunity to interview, but also for being a part of the summer program year after year. I just love it.